Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Lentini, and I'm the host for Different Thinking for Different Times. And this is season 6 and episode 10. And if it's 11, then don't make me wrong about this. Probably something I should have checked before the podcast. But the acorn brain told me I was fine. And that's my work, is about helping people expand their thinking, because so many of us believe they're thinking today, and it's always been around. And at some point in time when we were in the cave, it was very good to believe our thinking, because when you went out for food, you might get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something very much larger than you. And today we don't have that, right? We go to the supermarket, we get in the car. Now, there are some times in the car we have to be careful. But again, the automatic thought, it isn't necessary to automatically go to fear or freeze or flight or fight. It's not necessary today. And sadly, in our society, we have sunken into believing our automatic thought, and we're railing against others who disagree with us. We're trying to change people's minds, or worse, one group thinks it's right and everyone else should follow, and then the other group thinks the same. And what's happened is we're making each other wrong, and it's small-minded thinking. And think about this for a minute. This is the thought I want to leave you with before we talk to Braxton. You're going to love my guest today, because it fits right in with why some of this thinking happens. And he's going to give you some ideas about how to overcome it, how to deal with it, how to recognize it. So what happens today is we forget we live in a universe. We live in something we don't even understand. We call it a universe to give it definition, because our brains cannot wrap around something that's limitless, goes on forever. And what happens is small-minded thinking does not model what created the universe, whatever you call it. It doesn't model the energy of something that's infinite. And then when we can work to expand our small-minded thinking into something more limitless, infinite, it starts when we begin to question our own thinking and to work on training our minds. We can actually train our minds. And that's a perfect segue. Let me introduce Braxton Rose. Now, he's a somatic therapist. He's going to explain that to you, but I can tell you it's a perfect fit for what this podcast has been talking about for 6 years. So with that, I want everyone to meet Braxton Rose and start with telling us about yourself,
Cool.
and what you do, and then we'll get going. We'll get right into this.
Sweet. Well, Steve, I really appreciate you having me on. This is a pleasure.
I'm grateful that you're on, because it's a great addition to help people really understand what's going on when
Yeah.
they have blocks, maybe that I might call small-minded thinking, but there's a good reason for it. And I don't want to make people wrong for anything they're experiencing. Just the message is that they can reprogram their mind. And it sounds like what you do every day is helping people do just that. So
Yeah. Well said. Well
tell
said.
us about you, where you are, where you practice, how they can reach you, and then we'll do it again before we close the show.
Okay. So thank you again. But my title is a somatic therapist, and I always like saying, when I say that to people, everyone's eyes get a little glazed initially, because they're like, I know what a therapist is, I know what a cognitive therapist is, I know what a somatic therapist is. So a somatic therapist focuses on the autonomic nervous system and the physiology as it's related to your mind and your psychology. And so if we think of the cognitive therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, CPT, of like a more of a top-down approach, somatic therapy would be more of a bottom-up approach, similar to sensory motor psychotherapy or to like EMDR.
What is EMBR?
Eye movement and desensitization reprocessing. So
Okay.
it's a trauma therapy technique for the
Okay.
processing of traumatic events.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we do in somatic therapy is we are recognizing how your physiology responds to conscious or subconscious events,
Mm-hmm.
and makes compensation strategies around how basically to survive those events.
Mm-hmm.
I'm based out of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in private practice for 8 years. I also work for a public health company.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm currently doing research about how developmental trauma causes these compensation patterns to show up later in life. So a little about how I got into that. I've been in the mind-body space for about 15 years. I was a yoga teacher. I've taught all over the world and opened up yoga studios. And then I ended up experiencing in my early 20s a pretty substantial back injury. And to my experience, I woke up and had basically I couldn't feel my legs and went through the very traditional Western medical sense of like getting these diagnoses and getting these opinions and having be told. I had this one really, really well-dressed New York doctor tell me that I wouldn't be able to touch my toes again, basically. And so, you get that information when you're in your 20s. You're like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm very healthy, very fit. Why is this occurring? And started to look into some holistic treatments for back pain. Mm-hmm. And I ended up meeting someone online, literally from Instagram, that got me out of back pain within one session. And amazing experience. And so what that sent me down this rabbit hole of understanding how your posture, how your body interprets stress, how you handle compensation strategies. And I've been on the quest.
That clinician was a somatic therapist?
No, so that clinician actually was something called a postural therapist.
Okay.
And I was going to allude to that. My initial training was after yoga, was something called postural therapy, which is from a methodology called the Egoscue method. Mm-hmm. And postural therapy is more like a holistic approach to physical therapy. Mm-hmm. And what I like to say is it's the closest thing to somatic therapy in the physical therapist perspective. Mm-hmm. Traditional physical therapy would say, I have a knee issue, let's strengthen your knee. Postural therapy says, I have a knee issue. Well, if the knee is an issue, what's happening with your ankle, your hip, your shoulder, your spine, your neck, your hands? Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at the person from a whole body perspective. Mm-hmm. So what was fascinating for me is I was in practice doing postural therapy, seeing 20 to 30 clients a week, renegotiating chronic pain, working with all different ranges of injury, from professional athletes to teenagers. And what was occurring is, as we were doing these renegotiations of someone's physical posture, how their body held itself in space, I have this statement that would occur all the time. Someone would say, hey, I'm remembering something that I haven't thought about since I was 6. Mm-hmm. And that was, it happened a few times. And then it started to happen on the regular. And that gave me, I was like, something is occurring here that's deeper than just physiological reprocessing. And that got me really curious about the work of Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges, and eventually Peter Levine, from who created somatic experiencing. And so what I've done is I've combined a bunch of these methodologies together, and that's my practice. Mm-hmm. Sessions with me sometimes look like the traditional psychotherapeutic model where we sit and talk. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're like doing something that looks more like physical therapy, but we're blending it all together. Mm-hmm. And as I said to you like a little bit before, my mission statement is I really want to have there be a combination. I want there to be more physical therapy and psychotherapy. I want more psychotherapy and physical therapy. And I think if we integrate more of a holistic, well-rounded approach to any of these avenues, we can meet people in a better place for their renegotiation of healing.
Yeah. So it sounds like, too, that there's something about past traumatic events that show up later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to do something. I love and hate doing this, but it's such a good example.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I have one of my son's like little toys here. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to, even though like you're where you are, I'm where I am. If I imagine, I'm going to say, I'm going to toss this to you. Mm-hmm. Even if I can't throw this to you, your physiology already is responding to the fact that I'm doing this.
I've always had that. I want to hold my hand up and catch it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So a bunch of things are happening there. One, there's a ventral vagal component. So from the autonomic nervous system, social engagement. I'm like, let's play a game.
The autonomic?
Yeah, the autonomic nervous system. Okay. Yeah, the ANS. So that's operating at all times. It's this part of our central nervous system that basically interprets all the stimulus around us, sections into different categories, and it helps us basically interpret and experience the world. And we could probably have a conversation about the ANS for a couple weeks at a time, which would be a fun time for us to do it. But in this situation, if I imagine throwing this to you, there's a social engagement component, but there's also a little bit of like this uptick of energy. Engagement of the muscles in the arms and the chest. There's engagement of the muscles in the neck. There's an engagement of muscles in the eyes, which affects the brainstem and the back of the head. There's an engagement of the lower body, as well as like the groin, the hips. So the whole system is ready for you to catch this kid's toy, even though I'm across the screen from you. Now, because we know that's the case, and we can experience this through play or joke or imagination, Every time that happens, there's a mechanical stimuli that's being released into your body. And that mechanical stimuli is something called mechanotransduction. It's basically the process in which mechanical stimuli are transmitted to biological changes and eventually intracellular changes in your body. And what that's doing is it's a repeated action. And that's called a sensory motor experience. So basically it's like, hey, catch this. I caught it. I know how to do that. Like you and me don't need to relearn how to catch a toy. But my son, who's, I have a bunch of sons, but my youngest son, he's learning to catch a toy for the first time. So he's repping that. Now, that's a fun thing to experience. Now, let's say we take into consideration that you rep something different. Let's say one time in your youth, you put your hand on a stove and you felt the pain of the stove, but you also had your parents yell and scream at the same time. So you were startled. Now, that happens once. It's normal. It's a corrective behavior. But if let's say that gets repped and repped and repped and repped and repped, and this action occurs, this action occurs, this action occurs, the body is really smart. It wants to offload the need to do that from a cognitive, really frontal loaded perspective to more of an autonomic action. Because to take a tangent, if you and I had to think about breathing all day long, it would be very tiring.
Yeah.
So our brain controls that. The same way over time, our brain's going to control, hey, Steve, catch this. Oh, I know how to do that now. What's challenging about that is if we have that pattern occur too much and we also couple it or associate it with a traumatic event or a high stressful loaded event, then the nervous system starts to interpret not just the actual stimulus, but the stimulus around the stimulus with the over event. And eventually that can cause us to have these subconscious negative compensation strategies that will result in things like chronic bracing or pain or injury long-term down the road, or just a disconnection from that part of our body because it becomes too much for us to be aware of at all times.
So I think of a sports thing, right? So I remember when Steve Sachs on the Yankees all of a sudden lost his ability to throw from second base to first base.
Correct. Yeah.
And I presume from what you just said is it became part of his autonomic system. And he was doing it quite naturally without even thinking about it. He scooped up a bouncer and threw to first base.
Yes.
Then all of a sudden he couldn't, probably because of some past trauma. Something seeped into his consciousness?
In some way, or it could have been a current trauma.
Okay.
And so we have to understand, there's ways to look at this. There's ways to look at it that you could experience a traumatic event that it can reshape your physiology. And maybe we'll come back to that in a second.
Sure.
You could also be in a situation where the cortical load of the current situation is beyond our capacity for our organism to cope with it. And what will happen in that moment is we will often regress to our default operating system under high demand of cortical load. And so maybe he repped that a ton of times. Probably been practicing that same thing for 20 years. But let's just say the circumstances around it, maybe it's his personal life that we don't know about behind the scenes. Maybe it's relationship with a coach. Maybe he messed up one or two times. But every time his body is in that state, it's not just a psychological thing. It's his physiology can't respond because the stakes are too high. And so oftentimes you see that with people where they're about to jump off of the edge of a bridge or a rock into water, and they go to jump and their legs lock. It's because their body can't take in the amount, they can't respond as fast as it needs to. And it shifts from more of I'm going to go into this briefly, from more of an activated state around sympathetic activation, which is the fight and flight response, more to a parasympathetic, which is a freeze and shut down, also recovery response. And the system will actually the organism from continuing because it's actually more advantageous for me to do less than it is for me to do more because the risks outweigh the rewards in this regard. So what's interesting about this piece of it is, I took statistics twice in college because the first time I took it, I didn't do very well. I had to take it a second time in my undergrad. But I really like stats because if we think of this operating system of our nervous system, of our brain, it's really a statistical equation. It's like, oh, this person's wearing a red shirt. Oh, this person's wearing a green shirt. I remember 20 times in my life I've seen people with red and green shirts. And statistically speaking, 75% of the time that's been okay. But this person in the red and the green shirt are also wearing a hat. And in my life, only 20% of the time, the shirt, hat are associated with positive success. I'm so anxious for some reason. And you go to your talk therapist or you go think about yourself. I have no idea why this person in this situation caused me to feel stressed. We would say, well, your system brought all the information forward to deem that in this moment, statistically, this situation was beyond your capacity to handle it. And we're looking at survival, not about thriving. Our organism is always about thriving. So maybe you're a baseball player in that regard. Rep that 20,000 repetitions. But for some reason, the situation aligned in just a way that his physiology said it's better for you to lock up because the situation deems that than to be able to move forward and potentially have something worse happen.
So in your experience with the somatic therapy, and you've been doing that now for 8 years, you said?
I've been in private practice for 8 years.
Private practice.
Yeah.
Before that, you were also...
Before that, I was a full-time yoga teacher, and I was basically studying physiology and autonomic functioning for the last 12 to 15 years.
Okay. So in your experience, what kind of things do you see people coming to you for treatment for, and what are you helping them with, and what are you seeing as far as the result?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So a bunch of different things. Let me go to the one that first comes to my mind because I really got passionate about back pain. And speaking, as I shared with you before, back pain was my thing. And that was like, I was being told, of course, you're not going to get better. And then figuring out I can get better. And
a lot of people have back pains.
That's correct.
A lot of people, yeah.
People right now listening to this podcast might have some back pain.
Yeah. Well, and often they're recommended surgeries, which are very...
Correct.
They're very risky and don't often solve the problem. I have a friend who's had 4 back surgeries.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So the statistics about back surgery and surgery in general is pretty challenging. I don't want to go too much into that conversation because I feel like that could be, but because what I like to say, what's really valuable is that we live in a place in the United States, if you listen to this in the United States or wherever you are, that Western medicine is very evolved. And if you are in a situation, you have a catastrophic injury and you need support, how great. But we're not always good at figuring out, you don't fit the model. Let's figure out how we can help you renegotiate this in a different way.
Yeah.
So let's just add some pieces to this puzzle. So there was a researcher in the 80s named John Sarno. Do you know that name?
Yeah, I've heard that name.
Yeah. So he wrote a book called Healing Back Pain. And one of his big things was that he believed that almost all back pain was this thing called psychosomatic. And that word psychosomatic basically it's been stigmatized as saying it's all in your head. I like the word psychophysiological. So psychophysiological says, okay, it's in your head, but it's also in your body because it's a two-way street. And what he found was that he could put people through a treatment of talk therapy or a kind of a renegotiation of some psychological distress, and their back pain would decrease. And what we do in somatic therapy is a similar thing, but we also notice that what caused the physical pain to manifest also has some physiological markers in actuality. So an example about that might be is again, you and I are sitting down right now. And I'm going to be like, oh, Steve, let's catch this super fun little yellow toy. I keep coming back to this, And as you and I engage the social engagement system, there's going to be a welling up of excitement in the body. And that's because it's oh, this is kind of fun. And with that becomes muscle activation. Not to get too into the anatomy, but you and I right now are in a position called hip flexion. And what hip flexion is right now, technically our femur is closer to our pelvis than it would be if we were standing. So our hip is technically flexed. Now with hip flexion, the muscles that are shortened in that regard are the iliacus, the psoas, the rectus femoris, muscles in the pelvic floor. We have this contraction. Now, let's say we have this shortening, but now you put yourself in an 80 mile per hour driving car and you're listening to your podcast, and someone cuts in front of you and you slam in your brakes and get really activated, the muscles in the hips are going to engage dramatically because they're saying, hold up, I could get really badly injured. So they're going to respond faster than our brain can even say, you don't need to brace your hip muscles. Now that happens one time, like I said before, that's fine. But over time, the constant contraction of the insertion and the origin of the muscle cause the muscle to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the nervous system believes it's more advantageous for the muscles to stay braced than it does to become long again. Now, the reason that is really important because, again, the nervous system is all about survival. And startup requirements are a really important thing. What I mean by startup requirements, like if I had to run from a threat, it's better that I'm already primed for that. And we can speak to like the perspective of like the small-minded brain, like being in survival mode all the time. It's like hypervigilance, like always be ready, always be ready, always be ready. If that's going on, somewhere in your body is also bracing. Right? So then you take this muscle and you shorten it for a year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years of sitting at a desk job of constant stress. You go to stand, the body can't redistribute the load. And over time, these subconscious postural compensations show up. And that might look like the spine gets pulled forward, the spine extends too much, the pelvis overarches, the shoulders round forward, the head comes forward. And any of those things, if it's a deviation from neutral, will cause some kind of bracing, and then bracing causes pain. And John Sarno, to go back to that, called that symptom something called TMS, which is called tension-myosis syndrome. And tension-myosis syndrome is this concept that the muscles have become so overbraced that oxygen no longer can get through the muscle. And so, interestingly, when people think about that, like, well, why can't I just breathe my way to get more relief? Really, it's about there's so much calcification in the muscle system that the muscle goes into a spasm. And the research has shown that muscle spasm is actually more painful than actually tearing something.
Wow.
And because the system's going like, oh my God, this is too much, there's a nervous system component there. So then you go into this muscle spasm, you go to get a diagnosis. They're going to find something, because if I MRI'd everyone's spine in a 10-mile radius, I'm going to find something. You then hyperfixate on the issue at hand. The doctor limits your belief on what you can do because you have the spinal injury, you have the degeneration, you have a hip issue, you have a knee issue, you have this thing. And then you start to live in a more braced way, more confined, less thriving, more surviving. And over time, it rolls into another compensation, another compensation, another compensation. And then eventually I'm in pain. I can't get out of pain. I've tried all these things, but no one's ever said, hey, we got to address your whole system. We got to train you that you're safe again. We got to train your body that it has the capacity to get out of this compensation pattern it's been in. And let's renegotiate that together. And so what I would sometimes and you asked maybe some specifics, we can go into that. I had this one client who showed up in a very similar pattern that we're talking about here. 30 years of desk job, very tight hips, lower back pain, multiple diagnoses of degeneration in the back. And we didn't do a tremendous amount to change his body posture. We just had him learn how to stand in a neutral position without compensating. And just by that, his body was like, oh, I remember how to do this. Because before he was at a desk job, for his early 30s and early 20s and teens, he stood and he ran. He had 30 years of practice. The body just needed to remember that it had the capacity to get there.
So that's like reprogramming the mind to some
Correct.
degree, which I've talked about here for 6 years.
Yes.
And so you're helping them do that. Now, how does that look? What's that look like? A conversation, some physical movement? Tell us about that.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I mean, it depends. Like sometimes it's a sitting psychotherapeutic model. We can talk about it also depends on how the client presents. Like sometimes if we're having a conversation of trauma renegotiation, it's a little different than I'm a professional athlete and my shoulder hurts. Like we got to figure that out. I would argue they're the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're sitting or standing or on the floor. But what we're trying to do is really meet the client where they are so that they have agency and understanding of how their system works. because a lot of the time because of the pathology, because of the diagnosis, we believe in some way. I'm going to say this thing that always gets me. I've had clients like, my body is broken, or I have a bad hip, or I have a bad back, or like my dad had a bad back and I have a bad back. I'm like, no, like your body has incredible capacity to be able to heal. And I believe in your capacity to heal. Let's just nudge you back in the way that you like have trust in yourself again. And like your physiology can do this. And that's so, I think for a lot of people, so empowering to be like, I've had sciatica for 10 years. I can't stand. I'm like, 20 minutes, you're standing without pain. And really important, I say this, I'm not trying to say I'm a wizard.
Right.
I tell my clients all the time, your pain might come back.
Right.
Because you've been compensating for 20 years.
Right.
But if we can change something a little, we can change it permanently. And so maybe it's sometimes it looks like physical therapy. Sometimes it looks more like muscle activation or yoga. Sometimes it looks like deep breathing and retraining how the diaphragm works. And sometimes it's just like sitting and doing body scans, noticing how your body responds to stressful stimuli.
Is that like a meditation?
I wouldn't call it a meditation.
Okay.
It's great. I like that. It's an interesting conversation on meditation. It's more of a, I do one with you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. This is
absolutely
fun. We can do it together.
Sure.
All right. So like what I want you to do is just notice the fact that your arms are resting on the armrests next to you. Now you knew that before, but I'm just bringing attention to it. And all I want to see what happens is that if you notice your arms are resting on the armrest, what else happens? What is that for you? Like if one thing you're bringing attention here, what else did you notice show up in your body?
There's some lower back pain.
Interesting. Yeah. So a little bit of a pain.
Which is what we're talking about, right?
Exactly. So what we might notice in that situation is as I brought your attention to your body, there was going to be a little settling. And the settling, your system's like, I have an opportunity to let Steve know that my back is still aching a little bit. So let's just notice that the back hurts. And also in the experience of noticing that your back hurts, notice if you said your back. And when I think of back, like, is it all the way from the back of your head to your lower back, or is it one part of your back?
It's lower back.
Got it. So now we've renegotiated that's not your back, it's just your lower back.
Right.
And then if it's your lower back, is it like on the left side or the right side?
Right now, more on the left side.
Got it. So like now we've taken it from your whole back, just like the left side of your lower back. And now kind of like that image on your shirt, which I'm resonating with at this moment, it's like, how big or small is the size of that pain in the area?
It's small.
Like this big, this big?
Yeah, that big. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we've taken
I could probably put my hand back there and identify where it is.
Yeah. So you can kind of bring your attention there. So what we've done is we've started to renegotiate the size of this pain. And now as you notice it, just curious if you notice it, but also notice how much of your body at this moment is not in pain.
Yeah. 98%.
Yeah. So we just start by allowing you to have that opportunity to renegotiate, because it takes the system. Like when someone says my back is killing me today, I'm like, well, that's a big part of your body.
Right.
And it's like all that there is. It's like, oh, okay, so 2% of my body's hurting. That doesn't take away like the severity of it, but it also gives it more manageable size. And then I would say, okay, so you notice that. Just curious, like what it would look like for you if you brought attention back to your arms resting on the armrest, but also brought your knees a little closer together. And what happens to your back?
No pain.
That's correct, yeah. So let's just notice the fact that now we went from having something to not having something.
Yeah.
And it might change, and it's designed to. Like, you work, I think you work in a psychotherapeutic model, a sitting model. You spend a lot of time doing awesome podcasts. Your system is used to these things.
Well, what's fascinating is the realization that that you brought me to with the questions is that it was 2% of my body.
Correct.
And my brain felt expanded with that. Right? Like it's not something to concern myself with. It's 2% of the body. And then when you told me to, again, feel my arms on the armrests and bring my legs closer together, there was no pain.
Right. That's right. Yeah, there's no pain.
To me, that's a reprogramming of the mind because I can follow that process that you just gave me.
Yes. And so and this is really a great, maybe a component of it. And we can talk a little bit about how trauma gets involved in this conversation.
Sure.
Is like, I might say I'm looking at all the biological markers, and also, but from a very cognitive perspective, yes, it's a lot of the same thing. It's like they're not one or the other; they are the same. It's just about what part of us we can gain leverage on. And when it comes to the renegotiation process with any kind of client, we're looking to see where their strengths lie. If I have a client that's very cognitive, like loves data and loves numbers and wants to chew on stuff, we're going to use that as their strength. But we're also looking to spread out and integrate the other components. And a nice deep breath there. It's like as the nervous system feels and supports, there's some change. So to go to this conversation about how trauma is involved in this a little bit more specifically, I talked about the long-term impacts of sitting, and that's a slow, progressive, or exposure to high levels of cortical load. Let's go to more of an acute moment. So a moment of trauma, I really like the Peter Levine quote here, is that trauma is, I've actually had some pushback about this quote, but I'm going to explain it, is that Peter Levine says trauma is not about the content. It's about what happens in the body during the content. And the reason I like that definition is that two people can experience a very similar event, and one might develop severe symptoms of PTSD and one might not. But each individual's physiology is going to be adapted by the event. Now, what happens in those moments of high cortical load, where the nervous system deems what I'm experiencing is beyond my capacity for survival, you're going to make subconscious survival decisions that you might not have thought you have the capacity to do before. But so let's just say, for having this conversation, that there is someone driving and this time you hit the brakes, but not fast enough. And you do hit the car in front of you, a little small fender bender. Very cordial situation. It's not stressful. You don't get injured. But in that moment, let's just say there was 1 or 2 seconds before you noticed you had to brake. Grab the steering wheel really hard. You brace the shoulders. You grip your butt cheeks. You squeeze your abs in. You hold your breath really deeply. And what the nervous system will say is that feeling was beyond my capacity. So it will start to almost wander away from being as present. It almost will be use this word disassociate, but it's almost a little more distant from it. It's you still need to be present, but it's you're not fully away, but you're not fully there. Let's say you go and everything's fine, and a couple of weeks later, you start driving your car and you just notice wow, I'm gripping the steering wheel much, much harder than I thought I was. I don't understand. And you kind of know it's about the event, but you don't think too much of it. Every single time that you drive and you don't get into a car accident, and you're doing the same physiological or psychological thought processes of, I better be repaired, and you don't have something happen, that's a statistical win for the organism. So now how many reps of doing that until the moment you get in your car and your cortisol levels are through the roof? Or you start to say, I don't think I can drive anymore because it's just way too much. And even though you don't feel like you have this trauma event from this fender bender, your physiology has been slowly reshaping your behavior to have you avoid driving altogether. And that's very successful for it, because I don't want to be in a situation where I could potentially be in a risky life situation. So there's 2 things need to happen there. One, there needs to be renegotiation psychologically, cognitively, the thought processes that are occurring under the surface of why this is occurring. Also, let's get back into that experience and say, what do you wish you could have done differently? Or how could your physiology have prepared you better? Hey, let's imagine you're driving in the car, and instead this time I want you to look up 2 seconds earlier and you're relaxed all of a sudden. The traumatic feelings of the event can dissipate and be renegotiated into the organism instead of being held captive in this survival state.
So that brings up another question for me. Besides it being physiological challenges, right, like driving and physical impact danger, right, the the emotional side of trauma, does that have an impact in the physical body? And does it translate to pains and
Yes.
challenges in the body?
I think yes, and also thanks for the question. Way to just make that happen. So John Sarno, again, back to that,
Mm-hmm.
researcher from the 80s, his big thing, his statement was 99% of people's lower back pain is related to anger. Now, you hear that and you're like, I'm not that angry or whatever, And I say, anger is an amazing emotion. It's not about that you're an angry person. It's that, have you not been able to express the expression of anger to the extent that you need to?
Well, let me ask another question. Could they be
Yeah,
angry at their life, at the outcome of their life, or a current
absolutely.
situation, right? Maybe
Absolutely.
their
Yeah,
life was rolling along and then all of a sudden they hit a speed bump, so to speak, in life.
of
And now
course.
they're angry at how their life is turning out.
Yes, absolutely. And also, and that's where it's a really important thing. Let's say you feel angry at your life. You're feeling like not motivated. You're feeling grumpy. You're feeling down,
Mm-hmm.
and you start to look and say, the things that I'm doing in my life, I'm not so. If I don't know if I like them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make this suggestion, and a lot of researchers in my field have thought the same thing. It's a little easier to be focused on that you have lower back pain than noticing that. It's a little easier for you to be like, I have this nagging shoulder injury that won't go away. Let me just make some physical therapy appointments and let me focus on taking care of this instead of noticing the fact that I'm kind of angry at my job,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm feeling down about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so the system is, I think that we are designed to avoid pain and seek pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
But what sometimes in the way of that is the dopaminergic response. The dopamine system in the body loves to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Loves it. It's like, let me go solve these problems. If I know I have a rotator cuff tear, I'm going to super be interested in solving that problem versus having to sit down and really think about these invisible thoughts. I think I need to consider doing a career change. And that's a lot. Let me just chase the dopamine to solve my shoulder problem,
Yeah.
And then it all gets wrapped up. It's all wrapped up. The more I avoid that thought, the more it becomes resistant in the system. The more I think about it, the more I embrace. The more I embrace, the more tense I get, the more pain shows up, and then you cycle.
All right. So as a somatic therapist, do you help them eventually uncover that it was more emotional than physical, or does the other solving the physical relieve the emotional?
Great question. It can be either or, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
balance. And so let's go back to your example of your baseball. I forget his name, but the
Steve
guy
Sachs.
Steve Sachs. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I'm from Boston.
People
so
can Google that.
Right. Okay,
Right.
Steve Sachs.
Well, he
all
made the errors in Boston too
Interesting. Okay,
when the
got it.
Yankees played the Red Sox.
So Steve Sachs, maybe I'm just kind of brainstorming this, and so I don't want to say I'm right or wrong about it because I don't know. I have to do some research myself. Is that maybe the physiological dysfunction was this so much riding on him to show up, so the emotions there were beyond his capacity. So he's avoiding the emotion, which causes more tension in the body, which makes him have errors. Or his physiology is all bound up and he's then doing that, which is then causing the emotions to show up. And so I think it actually becomes the same. And back to what I was saying when I first got into this practice, and I'll speak to myself for a second, as I was renegotiating my back pain and I was moving around, I would be doing physical therapy work to basically renegotiate some of the compensations I had. And I would be sometimes laying on the floor doing a stretch and I would get this wave of anger. Just rage. And then it would pass and I would be met with a lot of sadness. And then, and for me, exploring this field and knowing what was happening, I'm like, of course I'm angry. I'm angry that it's scary to be hurt. And I'm scared I didn't get help. And I'm scared that this is painful. Pain is scary.
Yeah.
As it reintegrates, my body is like, oh, you don't have to hold that as much. It's not under the surface as much as it used to be. Let's settle. And as you settle, you then start to learn about getting to this. We go a little spiritual here for a moment, but that state of contentment, that state of I'm just existing for a moment here.
Well, I like to remind people we live in a miracle. We forget. I keep this next to my desk to remind me this is the earth. Here's all the countries on it. painted on a marble. And
Love
when
it.
when my acorn brain is trying to enroll me and something's not working, or I'm not working, I'm not doing it right, then I remember, wait a minute, we live in a miracle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we
And
do.
yeah, so it's important to, at least from my experience, right? I don't try to convince anybody of anything, but to have a belief in a higher power is also can
Yeah.
be very helpful, right? It can be
Yeah,
healing.
absolutely.
It can help with the healing. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that, if you want to go down that road for a sec, which I think is a
Sure.
valuable conversation,
Sure.
is people speak, the Buddhist philosophy would speak about like finding nirvana, oneness,
Right.
enlightenment.
Right.
I think the thing that, again, this is a bit of a tangent from our data driven conversation, maybe, but
Right.
the state of oneness is not a state you're supposed to exist in all the time. It's a state you fluctuate in and out of,
Right.
which is the same thing as contentment. And we can learn this from looking at animal models. My cat is like vibing out, just taking a nap, and he is like, you can see his body, his diaphragm is breathing. He's in rest and recovery. He's at ease. But all of a sudden, he hears a snap, and his ears perk up, and he is alert, and he is orienting. He's active. His muscles are pumping, and then he lets it go again.
Yeah.
And comes back to neutral, and he's back there again. And what happens with traumatic events, what happens with long-term exposure to high stressful situations,
Mm-hmm.
what happens with chronic injury, which happens with like unexplained catastrophic injury,
Mm-hmm.
is it kicks us out of our ability to get to contentment.
Mm-hmm.
So the body is trying so hard to get there.
Yeah.
But it can't get there because it's just a little stuck.
Yeah.
And so I like to say, where I know my clients are being successful is we'll be doing a session, and then there'll be this moment, and they'll sit there and they'll be like, I don't have pain. I'm not really thinking about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, hey, it's nice to see you. Like, welcome to being here.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, I want to be here a long time. I'm like, you're going to be here until we're done. And then, hey, you got to go grocery shopping after this. So like, you're going to come back to activation, and you're going to go back to your life, and then we'll come back and do it again. And the more time we can get there, the more opportunity we can need to get back.
That is great. Now, what kind of pain, if people are experiencing back pain, knee pain, shoulder pain, fingers pain, foot pain, are all those things, is it possible to help them and treat them with somatic therapy?
So the short answer I'm going to say is that no, I have not met a person yet that cannot get help.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. Okay, to understand, right?
Yeah,
if you
I'm
had
gonna say
some,
yes.
if you had some qualifiers.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I have not met a person yet who can. Now I will redact that slightly.
Okay.
And then maybe go to the sense of like, okay, if someone has like a substantial traumatic brain injury, I might not be the person to be able to work with you, but you might be able to. Or if so, and everyone's to have their area of expertise, but I've not met someone yet that can't get help and renegotiate something.
Okay.
Yeah. But it also, what we need to understand is, I love being able to help people quickly because I think there's a lot of urgency in pain.
Mm-hmm.
We also need to understand like what that looks like in terms of how long somebody's been compensating for that. But I like to, this is my favorite quote, as I say, if we can change something even 1%, you can renegotiate and change it.
Mm-hmm.
But it could take some time to explore. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do they reach you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I should have probably prepared this right before I came onto your podcast, as my website is in the renegotiation phase.
Okay.
So,
that's okay.
Yeah. But my company is called Revival Integrative Therapies.
Revival Integrative
Therapies. And that's the email address. So revivalintegrativetherapies@gmail.com.
Revival Integrative Therapies@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say it again. Revival Integrative Therapies. Revival Integrative Therapies@gmail.com. And when do you expect the website to be reconstructed and open again?
Nice deep breath. I'm hoping to have it be up in the next couple of weeks. That's my intention.
All right. So we'll say that by the middle of April, they should be able to find you on the web, or definitely by the end of April.
That's the hope. Yes.
Okay. And people can always reach out to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
SteveLentini.com and Steve at Steve Lentini. I'll even show you how to spell it. Not that I'm trying to plug my book, but I want people to understand how to sell it here. I won't even show them the title of the book.
Nice. I
Steve
like the
at
cover.
stevelentini.com and say, hey, how do I reach Braxton?
Cool. Great.
And let me do it again. Revival Integrative Therapies at gmail.com. And that's Braxton Rose. And this has been a fascinating and very informative session. In fact, you saw a demo of where he helped me when I realized first my arms were on the armrest. So that's being present, right? Feeling myself. I'm grounded. I'm feeling my body. And then I noticed as he had me just scanned for where there was some pain, I had some back pain over my left hip. And then when he said, what percent of that? Like, what's the percent of it? Is it big or small? And I said small. Then he said, what percent in terms of 100% of your body? It was 2%. And by the way, now it's not, there's no pain. It's
Yes.
fascinating, like recognizing it, understanding it. It was a fascinating process. And you all got to see that. And I hope you go back over the podcast to listen to what Braxton has to say. Because if you've got some pain, there are other methods, right? Alternative methods, holistic methods that can help you heal your body.
Mm. Well
And
said.
I'm grateful, Braxton, that you spent the time to come on. And again, I hope people reach out to Revival Integrative Therapies at gmail.com and say, Braxton, I need your help. Let's talk. And he's in Boston area, right? And
Correct.
where is your practice office?
So I primarily work remotely. That's why I work remote because I work for a public
Okay.
health company. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Right now
Yeah.
I'm in the public health mental health space. So
Okay.
when it comes to working with clients that are more individual, it's mainly online.
Okay. That's great because you just saw that he helped me.
Yeah. Correct.
All right. Any questions again, Steve at stevelentini.com. I'll connect you with Braxton or Revival Integrative Therapies at gmail.com and reach out. I think it'll make a big difference. I'm grateful, Braxton.
Thanks for your time. It's been a
I'm
pleasure.
grateful that you've been a guest, and I'm grateful to my audience. This is what we do, right? I'm working on helping people expand small-minded thinking and model what we're seeing, right? Because we live in a universe, model that infinite, limitless thinking. Try it. Question your thinking. Because if you don't question it, by the way, most people are irritated when other people question their thinking. When you do it, it begins a journey of self-awareness growth, and your emotional quotient, your EQ can actually increase throughout your life. But don't take my word for it. You got to prove this to yourself. All right, Braxton.
Thank you.